Hi, I'm Steve Hassan, and I'm delighted to have with me from North Carolina, John Huddle. Hi, John. Thanks so much for joining with me today.
Hi,
Uh,
Steve. Thank you for having me.
yeah, absolutely. I've been wanting to do this interview with you for a long time, actually. I believe you contacted me years ago about the Word of Faith Fellowship. And what kind of pushed me forward was a new book that came out, Broken Faith, by Mitch Weiss and Holbrook Moore. But you yourself had written a book. Tell us the name of your book and hold it up, please.
My book is called Locked In.
My Imprisoned Year in a Destructive Cult.
Right, My Imprisoned Years of Destructive Cult. It's my personal account of my time inside the group, and it runs from basically 92 to 2008.
Yeah, that's a long time. So, John, I have a lot of listeners who are in the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Mormons and all kinds of other Bible cults. So, in case they haven't heard of the Word of Faith Fellowship, which is the cult that we're going to talk about today, um, I'd like to ask you to give a little primer to everybody. And before we started recording, you had told me that Sam and Jane, and she's the leader, she's the totalist cult leader of the Word of Faith Fellowship. They were actually asked to leave a Pentecostal movement or group. Could you give us a little backstory and then tell us about the Word of Faith Fellowship and some of your experiences that make it so destructive?
The Word of Faith Fellowship was actually incorporated in 1979, and Sam and Jane went to Tulsa, Oklahoma to be a part of a ministry out there. And Sam quickly rose in the ranks. He became a teacher of the ministry. He traveled. And while he was traveling, Jane started prayer meetings on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And these prayer meetings contained doctrines that were not in line with the original group that they had come out there to be a part of. And in 1985, I had a man who was in a meeting, and he told me that that couple, Sam and Jane Whaley, had left the original ministry and had been asked to leave.
Yeah, that
And
was Kenneth Hagan,
Kenneth Hagin Sr.
Senior. Uh-huh.
in 1985. And at the time, it didn't register with me. I didn't know anything about Sam and Jane Whaley, and so I just tucked it away, but didn't give it much thought because I didn't know anything about them.
Right.
And so they came back to North Carolina with about 20 people. They set up and eventually started having meetings in an old steakhouse and their Jane was from the county, so she knew a lot of people, and they brought a lot of people from outside the United States came in because Sam had traveled the world and made connections.
Uh-huh.
So there were people from as many as 20 different nations there. And this drew a little attention in the community. But where I came to be involved was in 1992. My wife and I moved to Greenville, South Carolina to be a part of a church where she had known the pastors for several years. And we didn't realize they were connected with Sam and Jane when we initially moved in.
Uh-huh.
But soon after we got there, we began to hear that God was moving in Spindale, North Carolina. And in May of 92, we went to our first organized meeting at that church.
Uh-huh.
And over the years, we found out how dependent the church in Greenville, their leadership became on Sam and Jane.
Mm-hmm.
And so after 10 years of driving back and forth to different meetings, Jane came down, and I'll never forget it. She was sitting in the chair. She was yawning. She said, God told me that it was time for the Greenville church to come to Spindale, move to Spindale. And so we packed up a few months later, and we moved into the group. And I was there from 2002 to 2008.
So just to make sure everybody who's watching this understands, she claims that she prays and God tells her things of what needs to happen, including if somebody has a demon in them and needs it to be cleaned out and exorcised. This is all.
Yes, her signature practice is the blasting and deliverance from demonic spirits. She is the apex. She is the voice of God in the group. Her husband over the years has taken a back seat, and it is a totalist environment. I mean,
Right. And I've watched videos of blasting, which is also done to little children, which is essentially screaming
true.
at them to try to scare the demons out of them. Does that kind of cover it or not?
Well, it the underlying aspect is you're told you either have a breakthrough or you don't have a breakthrough. And even if you feel like you had a breakthrough, it's contingent on somebody in leadership, particularly Jane, to agree that you're changed, you're delivered.
I see. So it needs external confirmation according to her.
Right, right. And so, I mean, the confusing part for a lot of people locally is that they have certain standard traditional practices. They'll take communion, they'll have weddings and christening, the dedication of children, they'll have memorial services. They have certain practices that are traditionally related,
Yeah.
which throws a cover of deception on a lot of the stuff that happens in the back room.
Right. That's always the case with religious cults, is they have a veneer to try to appear to be normal like everybody else. But then it's really about authoritarianism, isn't it? And control of behavior, information, thoughts, and emotions to make people dependent and obedient.
Exactly. In that group, one of the things you never talk about is that you have to believe and act like you believe that Jane is the only voice of God that has authority. If someone else gives you something to do that they say they heard from God, they're always subject to her. So it's not even it's the power structure is, I mean, she's at the top.
Totalist. So in other words, if I'm in the Word of Faith Fellowship and I happen to watch some other mega church apostle who gets revelations from God and says that I have to move to Florida to be in his church, what happens if I'm in the Word of Faith Fellowship?
Well, first of all, if you admitted to watching television, you would be blasted. You would be on church discipline. There are no televisions in the homes of the regular members.
And what about internet?
They have internet, but you're not supposed to be on the internet unless someone's there right beside of you watching what you're doing.
Aha. So it's total information control is
It
what
is.
you're describing. And you have to tattle on any other member if you are aware that they may be doing something.
Because if you don't, then you're guilty as they are.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if I remember correctly, you read my book, Combating Cult Mind Control?
I did.
At some point?
I did. I knew you had not studied Word of Faith Fellowship, but it felt like you had. The way the book, and I underlined and circled. I mean, shortly after I got out, I read it.
Yep.
The initial book that drew me out of the group was Ronald Enroth, Churches Abuse.
Yeah, that's an old book, and he was a professor of religion, I believe, at Westmont College.
Yes, and it's out of print, but I found a copy while I was still in, and that led me out.
I think it's online now. I think
it is totally free.
Actually search for a PDF of it if they'd like to read his work. Yep. So, and also I want to make sure we cover this, that you left, but your wife and your kids stayed behind, and you were excommunicated, and they are not allowed, your kids aren't allowed to be in your life and communicate with you.
Right. I have not spoken to my children since. I've not seen them my daughter since 2014. I've not seen my son since 2012. Um, I get pictures from ex people that leave, so I have a picture of my grandson, but I don't have a picture of my granddaughter, and
And
I've
your
never
kids
met them.
and your kids have been cut off from your whole family too, even though they
Right,
may not have ever been in the group. It's not okay for them to see their aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents
right.
on your
They
side.
can visit with their mother's side of the family, but they cannot visit
And the
with my side.
mother's side of the family are not in the Word of Faith
They're
Fellowship.
not in the Word of Faith, but they're keeping the doors open, and as far as I know, they're still allowed to talk to my ex-wife.
Yeah, it's a heartbreak. So we call this parental alienation. And many times that term is actually used when one parent divorces another parent, and the parent that's custodial over the kids programs the kids against the other parent and alienates them. But this is institutional parental alienation, as like the Jehovah's Witnesses or any number of other Bible-oriented cult groups, as a tool to keep people in because they don't want to be cut off from their
Yes.
kids and their grandkids or their parents even.
Well, when I left July 10th of 2008, I didn't think it was going to be forever. I was hoping to get some separation and get some focus and perspective. But 3 days after I left, my wife calls me and she had my stuff piled up in the garage and said, "Come get it or we're throwing it away." And it was as if you don't pick it up, we're going to burn it. Things I had forgotten I had. I mean, they emptied out everything that had even attached to me and just
Yeah, but that was not her idea. Jane Whaley or
yeah.
someone in the group told her God wants this, right?
Oh, yes, she's very obedient. Yes.
Yeah. So what a heartache. So but that's maybe we'll do a different blog on what to do about being cut off from your children and your grandchildren. But coming back now to the time, COVID-19 pandemic, and I've written a book on Trump, and I've written
Yes.
about the Christian right and all the forces that are trying to subvert the separation of church and state and wanting to impose religion on everybody else, their version of religion. And as of last night, there were 14 states that were granting religious exemptions to church organizations or cult organizations who want to meet in person in large gatherings. And in some states, they're actually arresting people
Yes.
for violating the law, but other states it is not that way, especially if a group is got a lot of followers and they're very active in politics, or have given a lot of money to the politicians, the governors, for example. So talk to me about COVID-19 and the Word of Faith Fellowship to the best of your knowledge.
I personally have not talked to anybody on the inside about what's going on, but there are people I don't know who they are, but they have contacted a friend of mine who's also an advocate, and they provided her with some information, a text message string that the leader of the group is quoted as saying, "I don't think we have anything to worry about with this virus coming to church."
You mean Jane Whaley was saying?
Jane Whaley.
Yeah.
She calls herself, she referred to herself as Grandma Jane.
Grandma Jane. But
Yeah.
she's also, didn't she consider herself an apostle earlier
When,
on?
earlier on in the 90s, there
Yeah.
was material that she and her husband put out that they called themselves apostles.
Yeah, which is consistent with a new apostolic reformation, where people say, I'm an apostle or I'm a prophet and God speaks to me. And so follow me and I'll protect you from Satan, because Satan and demons are everywhere.
Well, from that text string, from what we can deduce, not this past week, but the week previous to that, they were still meeting in groups. On the 30th of March, Governor Cooper in the state of North Carolina restricted the groups from 50 to 10.
Okay.
And even inside groups of 10, you've got to practice social distancing. So on the one hand, it seems extreme, but on the other hand, the number of cases, new cases, is dropping in North Carolina. And it's, I would say, one of the reasons is the social distancing.
Right.
I mean, it's working.
Right.
And the Rutherford County Emergency Management Group, well, I called them and expressed my concerns.
Right.
And they would not confirm or deny the number of cases in the county that were inside that group.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But what I've heard and what has been published, this weekend there were a total of 15 cases in that county.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Estimates vary between a half to 2/3 of those cases are inside the group.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Wow.
I personally have no way to verify that, but I'm getting information told to me, and the names, I'm not publishing the names.
Right.
But it's directly related to their unwillingness to practice the social distancing as early as other people, as
Right.
early as was directed. It's
Right.
a direct fallout.
Right. Well, the epicenter in South Korea was a cult group called Shincheonji, and members were mandated to come to the church. You know, otherwise they lose their connection to God, and they believe
Right.
the leader is Jesus, a Korean named Man-hee Lee. It was actually Jesus, and he almost went to jail for homicide because he was, you know, mandating everybody come. And I guess they worked out some kind of deal because I haven't heard that he's in jail. But that was the epicenter for the entire South Korean infection, as I understand it. And that cult is in the United States.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they're in Orange County. They have different front groups. But the point is, for me, the bigger point is just that if you're in an authoritarian religious group and the leader says, I hear directly from God, and they have a black and white, all or nothing, good versus evil, you know, ideology where they're making people totally dependent on them, or else they'll get blasted, or else they'll get excommunicated, like you were. So the social controls are so extreme that I think the average American or the average world citizen thinks people are crazy for meeting in person and believing that they're going to be safe from this virus, which, you know, doesn't care. It just wants to feed and wants to multiply as
Oh,
viruses.
it's not prejudice.
Yeah, it's not prejudiced, and it's not going to only be in one state and go, oh, I can't go over the state line, because people are going to be unwittingly carrying the virus with them. I have to just insert, and I hope I don't offend anybody, but I read something on social media about making an analogy of having peeing and having a pee only section in a pool. You know, that the pee is going to go everywhere, and
Yeah.
it just is the way pee is.
Well, let me mention one other thing. When you're inside that group, sickness is viewed as an indication that you're in sin in your life. You have sin in your life.
Aha.
So it has been brought to my attention by ex-members that there is a strong possibility that there are people with symptoms inside the group who are trying to hide them and not actually get tested. Because when we were inside the group, you didn't want to be sick because that got you more prayer. That gets you separated.
Right. So in other words, but if Jane Whaley gets sick, I bet nobody will know about it, right? Because then,
Well,
yeah.
if she gets sick, she'll blame it on her congregation for being in sin.
Right. So exactly. So in other words, I'm taking it. I'm Jane. I'm taking it for all your sins. God has decided. So I'll be the sacrificial lamb for your sins. Is that?
Right.
Yeah. That's incredible. So Scientology doesn't believe in illness and says that through their own techniques they can get rid of all illnesses. And so it's another variation of the blaming the victim. If you get cancer, it's your fault,
Yes,
versus you're exposed to cancer substances, or you had a genetic, mutation that caused it, or something like that. So I really, in our blog, we're going to have links to some of the specials that have been done on Word of Faith, that actually have videos of some of these blasting sessions. But I can
right.
tell you, as a mental health professional, there's no mental health professional can watch what's being done in a blasting session and not say that this is abuse.
It is.
Verbal, psychological, emotional abuse. And when I think of the Boston Church of Christ cult of Kip McKean, they would call them breaking sessions, where you get a group and you just be like nailing the person until they completely broke down and repented and wailed in tears and confessed of things that they never did, just to get out of the session.
Yes. I want to mention one thing real quick. I mean,
Sure.
in 2014, I attended a ICSA conference, and one of the sessions, International Cultic Studies
Celtic
Association.
Studies Association. I was
Yes.
going to say that, but good. Go ahead.
One of the sessions was 30 or 40 people in a room from different groups all across the world, and we were asked to introduce ourselves and just give a little bit of information. And it literally opened my eyes to the similarity of the control, the trauma, the injury that different groups in almost the same way put on people all across the world.
Yep.
It was so eye opening to me.
Yeah,
And
I felt the same way too after I got out of the moon cult and I started talking to ex-Scientologists, Krishnas, Children of God, all these other cults. And while they had different leaders, and some of them weren't even religious cults, some of them were
right,
political cults or therapy cults or multi-level marketing cults, they all had the same patterns of social controls, which
yes,
led to my writing the books. And that's how people would read my book and they like, he wrote about my group, but how did he know? And it's like,
yes,
I didn't know. I just wrote about the patterns that I saw,
yes,
right?
right.
So, can I ask what woke you up to get out? Because people are constantly saying, are these people hopeless, or will they ever wake up and start thinking for themselves again? And I'm an optimist, and I do believe that people have the capacity to wake up and get out. I do believe there's potential for your children and your grandchildren to be reunited with you and realize that they had been indoctrinated or brainwashed to think you were an evil person and they needed to stay away from you.
I'm a, I, there are days when that hope begins to fade, but I like to hear it, and it helps me when you say that.
Yep.
Um, so in 2008, I was called into a meeting, and I had a full-time job with a church member-owned company,
Okay.
and then I had a part-time job with another business 30 minutes away, that in an industry where I'd been working for, at that point, 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And the part-time job, I was not under the control of the group. And so they were saying that I was out from under authority and I had to quit the part-time job and just work the full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
That didn't sit well with me. And the way they blasted and carried the meeting through, I realized I wasn't being treated like I thought that Christians ought to be treated.
Right.
So I began to examine. I went on some forums that had some ex-members
Yep.
talking about their similar experiences, and then I got the Ronald Enroth book,
Yep.
and I made the decision. I'll never forget where I was. I mean, I know where I was standing. I know the moment I had the thought that this this needs to change. It was, I'll never forget it. But putting that exit plan together was very emotional. Was
Yeah.
very um, because I didn't think it would be forever. But then there was always the possibility that I would be treated like others that before me had been treated.
Yeah.
And so I I left July 10th, and up until that point, and this is no, this is not in my book. My wife had been separating my children from contact with me, and she had been sending them places during the day where I didn't know where they were.
Hmm.
So the July 10th, just real quickly, the day that I left, I looked across the street, and at another member's house, my son was watering the flowers.
Hmm.
And so I packed up the van that I was using to leave. I drove across. I walked up to my son, and he was stiff. And I mean, he's 13. He
Mm-hmm.
can't understand these things. This is just overwhelming to him.
Yep.
And I said, Michael, I'm stepping away. I'm going to get some perspective. I hugged him. He didn't hug me back. Made several phone calls and found my daughter. And I told my daughter the same thing, and she had a nervous, giggly laugh.
Mm.
And then I called my wife, and I told her, and she said it didn't have to be this way. And that gave me hope that maybe it wouldn't be forever. But soon that changed.
Yeah, it didn't have to be this way because she wanted you to come back to the cult, I'm sure.
Right. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly.
But so do your kids understand why you were leaving, or they just interpret that you were leaving them because you were possessed by the devil or something?
Initially, when I got out, they were warm to me. But when they saw that I wasn't coming back, they were told I was of the devil. I was going to hell. And they wrote that to me in different letters. And um, oddly enough, I've kept the letters.
Did you ever
But
write back?
I did. And then I was told not to write them again. Um,
By who? Your wife? Your ex-wife?
by them.
Mm-hmm. By them.
And they were told, because after I got out, I talked to other young people in the same position, and they said that when their father left or their parent left, they were told by leadership what to write in their letters.
Yep.
So
It's very stereotypical, John, with other cults. So what do you think, what do you imagine people inside the group heard about this book and the book tour and other former members speaking out than yourself?
the local newspaper got about 20 members and did a group interview. And this newspaper had a new editor, and he's only been there about a year. And he called me for comment on the book, so I can tell you this. Um, Before the book came out, he gathered 20 other members in a room, and actually, he was in the article said 3 of them had actually read the book.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a very good percentage. The
I don't believe it that they actually read it, but
well,
because I hear all the time cult members saying, "Oh yeah, I read Combating," and then I say, "Okay, tell me one detail
yeah.
to show that you've read it," and they can't think of anything because they haven't read it.
Well, the standard is anything in this book is a lie. I mean, it's the general cover of even anything in my book is a lie. In fact, it was told to me by someone inside the group that in my book, I list the rules, because when I got out, I wrote down as fast as I could in 30, 45 minutes. I wrote down 145 rules.
I'm
And
sorry for
so,
laughing. It is kind of,
well, and
it is,
I published them. I
yeah,
published them. First of all, I published them on my blog,
yes. And what's
and
the blog name?
religiouscultsinfo.com.
Yep,
Cult is plural.
yep.
And
Thank you.
um, so one of the young people went to Jane, the leader, and said, Jane, these rules in John's book are true. And I was told, she said, they're not true because I didn't write them.
I'm sorry for laughing. Oh my
So,
God. Talk about narcissism, which is,
yes.
of course, the stereotypical profile of cult leaders is it's all about them.
Well, let me give you another story. Shortly after I published it, she called me, and on a private number. I didn't know what the number was. So I
Yeah.
said, hello, this is John. She said, this is Jane. I've been reading what you put on the internet. And I said, Jane, which one of those rules is not true? She said, that's not the point. And she covertly threatened to take legal action. She never did. And I don't think she wants to be litigated whether or not they're a cult.
Right. Of course she doesn't.
Yeah, she doesn't want that litigation. So they're being told anything in my book or this new book is a lie, which is sad.
Of course it is. It's terrible. But that's exactly what people in the Watchtower are told too. And they say ex-members are apostates and yada yada yada. It's all about phobia indoctrination that if you leave the group, you're losing your soul. You're losing your paradise, your place in paradise. And
Well,
last days
and
are coming any second. And
with this COVID-19, the fear is by the tractor trailer load, I'm sure. If you leave, you step out that door and you walk away from us, you're going to get it.
yeah.
And you're not going to make it. I'm
Yep.
sure. I don't have to doubt that at all.
Yep. And Word of Faith, they also do corporal punishment, not just blasting. They actually spank, don't they?
They do.
Do they use
They,
paddles or just open hands?
they do. In fact, in 1995, there was, and this is in the Broken Faith book, there was a young man who went undercover and posed as a homeless man and was taken in by the group and began to film the services and the blasting.
Mm.
And that led to an Inside Edition expose where Bill O'Reilly years ago did that, and that's on the internet. And then that led to a state investigation, and then that led to a DSS investigation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the inside during that time, and even though I look back and the local DSS was not trained for control groups,
Right.
they went about it all wrong. And I mean, I was inside, and I could tell that.
Right.
So
well, it's like asking a cult member, "Are you brainwashed?"
Right.
It's not gonna. You're not gonna get any. Oh, of course not. I'm happy.
Of course not.
We're
not in a cult.
Don't be silly.
So the group sued the local DSS in 2003 and settled out in 2005. And it put, long story short, they put a lot of restrictions on the local DSS in the settlement. And that has been a fortress of not only we won, but to embrace the leader to continue her practices and do what we want to do.
Well, didn't you also say that that Jane Whaley also supports congressional candidates and other politicians?
Yes, you would have to go back and research it, but on their website they used to carry pictures of Lieutenant Governor Walter Dalton.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the leader, Sam Whaley, was asked by Congressman Charles Taylor years ago to open Congress in prayer.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so I think we need to have a little campaign happening in North Carolina for children's safety and children's rights and correct this DSS problem. Children need to be protected.
April is Child Abuse Prevention Awareness Month.
Oh.
And it is, even amongst this COVID fear, they're still concerned for the children.
Of course.
Because what has happened is if one parent is in and one parent is out, then the parent that's in says your children have been exposed. You can't have your visitation with them.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
Yeah,
it's
but you haven't seen your kids at all, and I assume you've asked, more recently to see your kids, or they're all over the age of majority, so it has nothing to do with your ex-wife now.
oh no, and my reference just then was couples that are now with children where one parent's in, one parent's out. That
Got
wasn't
it.
a reference to mine.
I see.
So,
So your children are how old now? May I ask?
my daughter will be 30, and my son is 25.
And do they work in cult businesses or they have outside
Well,
jobs?
my information is third hand.
Yep.
Um, my son, I am told, works for an office of cult attorneys in the group. Um, I'm told he's a very good writer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then my daughter is qualified as a radiologist, and she works out in different facilities that need that service.
Yep.
She works out in the public.
So, you mentioned it earlier in this interview about seeing the patterns with other cults and how it offers a perspective, on your own situation. And my hope for your kids is that as they're interacting with people who are not true believers in the cult, that they learn about other cults, that they
Right.
meet an ex-Jehovah's Witness, for example, or an ex-Mormon, or an ex-Moonie, and learn about the bite model, which I think is on your blog, is it not?
It is.
The
It
bite
is.
model?
And I get emails from people all across the world to my blog telling me, I read about this group, or I read your book, or I read Broken Faith, and I came out of another group, and that book helped me.
Yeah.
And so when they see the similarities, in fact, one of the things that I did when I first got out, well, a couple years in January of 10, I read Flora Jessup's Church of Lies.
Oh, I read that too. That was
Yeah,
in the
that
Fundamentalist Latter-day Saints called
right.
Warren Jeffs.
That book opened up me to reading memoirs of other. I've got 20 or 25 memoirs of other cult survivors, and it's a strong reinforcement of your own freedom to
Yeah,
read those.
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So, I just want to salute you for your desire not just to leave, but to help others and do a blog and write a book and remain an activist and help Pulitzer Prize winning author Mitch Weiss write Broken Faith inside the Word of Faith Fellowship, one of America's most dangerous cults. And all I can, if you're watching this interview and you're an ex-member and you're anywhere in North Carolina, I would really encourage you, if you want to help, to contact John or me, and let's get his kids out and his grandkids out. Let's talk about how to talk to people who are indoctrinated in mind control cults.
Yes.
And it's not saying you're in a mind control cult or like trying to attack the leader directly. It's more sharing your own journey and asking questions and talking about how healthy faith is asking questions, and there
Yes.
is no faith without doubt and without questions. If there isn't doubt and questions, you have coercion is what's happening, or mind control.
A few years ago, just real quick,
Yeah.
I was given the opportunity to speak at a local community college. And one of the things I encourage people to do, and to avoid getting trapped in groups like this, was to have someone in their life that had an opposite opinion of them, of what
Yes.
theirs was, and to not shut people out that had opposite opinions, but engage them in the conversation. And I had someone come up to me after that talk and said, that made no sense. And I thought, it might not make sense to you today, but it needs to make sense soon, because we all need to be able to engage in conversation with people that have different opinions, and then forge possibly a better understanding of the subject, whatever it is.
Right. So I guess I want to take 1 minute. We have just a couple minutes left, but just to talk about this um, confrontation between true believers, religious believers, and science and medicine, right? And true believers who are told that this is man's religion and it's Satan's religion, science and medicine and vaccinations and such. And I just want to make the point that the scientific method assumes that we don't know everything. It says, let's have a hypothesis, let's do tests, and if we find a better hypothesis, let's get rid of this hypothesis. Let's use that if it's grounded in tests and data and results. And so you're continually looking for doubters, people who say, I don't agree with that experiment. There's a bias in it. It needs to account for this or this or this. So there's a community of scientists who engage in order to keep that endeavor as pure as possible, dedicated to answering the question, whatever question it is. When you're talking about mind control cults with leaders who say, I know the truth, God speaks to me, and it's a closed system that says any other voice, any other perspective is that the devil. So it shuts down any type of questioning, and it keeps people as children, like dependent and obedient children to the cult leader who says, I know it all, because God, I have a direct link to the divine, and your whole salvation is dependent on me. And so what winds up happening when you're in one of these cults is you grow less and less the longer you're in. It's a very suffocating experience because you're not learning and growing. You're not forcing yourself to look at reality in different ways with different perspectives. So ultimately, it keeps people enslaved and not developmental. And I think that's why the human spirit doesn't like to be in mind control cults, and why people run away from mind control cults, even with the threats and the fear and everything else. I can't tell you how many people I've met in the last 44 years who said, I got to the point where I didn't care if I was going to hell. Like,
Right.
life was so miserable inside, I couldn't be me. I couldn't do what I wanted to do. I couldn't pursue my artwork. I couldn't pursue someone that I loved who was not in the group. I couldn't, on and on and on. And I do think when one has children, it forces a change of perspective. Like, you start to think about, what do I want to subject my kid to? And what kind of life do I want for my child? And so I'm hopeful ultimately that more people will wake up from religious cults where the leader says, God speaks to me directly, and you're in sin if you disobey me. Or you're in sin if you get sick with a virus. So as we wrap up, any last recommendations or thoughts or reflections you'd like to share, John?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to bring attention to this group. In the last several years, several groups have garnered a lot of media time, and there's been a lot of extreme practices exposed in different groups. And this one, the title of Broken Faith is not an underestimated perspective. It is one of the most dangerous cults in America.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that, you could measure that in several ways, but there are several members there that have been there 25, 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And their time's running out for them to explore and become aware of who they really are.
Yep.
But I just appreciate the opportunity you've given to bring attention to this group.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hoping someone will listen to your story and they're in a different group and they go, holy crap, oops, holy mackerel, John's story, it's with a totally different group, but I can relate.
Yes.
And if people want to be in touch with you, is there an email address they can be in touch with you?
You can email me at John, John, at johnhuddle.net.
Okay, great, John. So I want to thank you and I want to wish you the best. Stay healthy. And I don't know if you're religious. I'm Jewish, but I'll pray for your kids to wake up
Thank
and
you.
your ex-wife to wake up and all the other people who are being abused right now by Jane Whaley and Sam Whaley, and for all the other cult groups that are out there in authoritarian groups, that people will have an awakening that COVID-19 is not a punishment by God for not believing in whatever cult you're in. It just happens to be a virus, one of
Yes, there's
many
no shame in
tens
getting
of
the virus.
thousands of viruses that have existed for 1 billion years, and there'll be more after this too.
There will be.
Thank you, John, so much.